How's it going? Got a sponsored video for you today. This was sponsored by Epidemic Sound. If you use the link in the description of this video, you get 30 days of free music. And consider signing up for the commercial plan where you get unlimited access to music and sound effects for all types of projects, including commercials. So the challenge was to make a short film using only the sound effects and the music that you can find in the Epidemic library. So Kobe and I got creative, we made a little movie. I'm gonna show that to you now, and then we're gonna talk about how I did the sound for it. So let's go ahead and watch our short film, Quarantine Story.
Bonjour. Arrivederci.
Okay, hope you enjoyed the short movie. Now let's talk about how I did the sound effects for it. And I'll be posting an extended version of this tutorial in my film school Unscripted Studio, so check the description of this video for a link. All the sounds in this video came from the Epidemic Sounds sound library. This is Epidemic Sounds homepage. You just go to sound effects, and then you have all the sounds. What I found really convenient here was being able to click on a keyword. So if I just want ambience of people, I click on that and it removes every bit of ambience that doesn't have people. You can additionally filter by length. So let's say you need your ambience to be as long as your scene and your scene is over 2 minutes. Now every ambience that is too short has been cut out. So now I'm just gonna go through the video and show you a little bit more about how I did all the sounds. So first we've got this opening scene, which is compiled from a bunch of clips from my previous videos. So basically I work in 2 layers when I add sound effects. I have sort of an ambient bed, and then I put some incidental foreground sound effects on top of it. So you could think of it as the background and the foreground. Just like when you're composing video, you have a background and you have a foreground. Well, that's what I have with sounds. Okay, so the seagulls were the ambient bed, and then I put church bells on top of the seagulls. So I try to be really selective about the sounds I include in my scenes so that we only hear the sounds that propel the story forward. For instance, in this scene, there were actually pedestrians around her, there was traffic, but I didn't use any of those noises in the soundtrack because if I had too many layers of the ambience, then it all would have gotten kind of muddy. It would have been hard to tell what the point of the scene was. And the point of the scene is that she's listening to those bells. So I want them to ring loud, I want them to be very clear. So let's go to this very quick shot of waves on her feet. That wasn't just one sound. There was the ocean waves in the foreground, and then behind that, I had ambience, stormy wind in forest, and seagulls by the tide pools. So you hear one seagull squawk, you've got some sort of wind ambience, and you've got ocean waves peeking through in the foreground. Put them together and you get this. You need that ambience to make your sound effects seem more real. Listen to how lame it sounds if there's no ambience. Yeah, that sounds stupid. It sounds like a sound effect. So I put a carnival ride in the background. And you barely hear it. You know, a lot of it just comes down to perception. You have to trust your ears. Here we have her at a carnival. And I wanted to hear people screaming. But unfortunately, the carnival ride sounds that I found at Epidemic weren't as dense with the screams as I wanted. I wanted clusters of screams, but they're kind of spread out. Just take a listen. In a short clip, you might not even know that those are humans screaming. I mean, that could be just rusty brakes or something. So I wanted to be super, super clear that it was people screaming, and not just people, but young people. So I have this sound effect that I downloaded called Baseball Crowd Game. But I wanted everybody to sound a little bit younger. So here's what I did. I sped it up. I used my retime feature, which is this here. And I sped it up to a custom amount, 116%. And then I went up to retime in my menu and I disabled preserve pitch. So notice there's no check mark next to preserve pitch. That means it's disabled. So that means that as you speed it up, the sound gets higher. I just took it to 116% and we get this, which very subtly indicates to the audience that the people screaming are young. And then the sound gets tinny, like you're hearing it on a phone. So that sound is just a telephone effect and a low cut. So I removed low frequencies. That's one effect. And then I added telephone. Remove low frequencies and telephone. And yes, those sounds of her hand hitting the phone and the phone hitting the ground, those were sound effects too. I used impact plastic and crash plastic sound effects. And in the background, I had ES Kitchen House, which is just an ambient room tone bed. If you want to find the sounds of a room, search for room tone. That's the background noise that you barely hear as an audience that just creates a bit of realism in the scene because it's never perfectly silent in reality. There's always some sort of room tone, like this. That's room tone. We've got her yawn. I did a little bit of time shift on this, just like I showed you before, where I sped it up a little bit to make it a little bit higher because the original sound, her voice was a little too low. So I raised it and it sounds like this. Just a tiny bit. Something I do a lot with sound effects is reducing the overall presence of the sound effect. In other words, reducing the clarity and the noticeability of it. The way I do that is by using EQ. This was the original sound, and that's my modified version. So I went in and I applied a very intense high cut filter to give it a much duller quality. The point of sound effects usually is not to call attention to themselves, but to support the visuals and draw the audience into the story. So if at any point your sound effects become distracting, you want to turn the volume down. It's better for the audience to not hear it than to hear it too loudly. So when those sound effects started, I wanted a sudden burst of sound that's instantly recognizable as city traffic. Then we go to the next scene and the music starts and I continue the city traffic ambience. The music you're hearing is called Ballroom Dance by Franz. I wanted a jazzy, laid back sort of feel.
Bonjour. Arrivederci.
So I searched for hello in the sound effects library and I ended up getting a bunch of different clips of people saying hello in different languages. So that's what you're hearing here.
Bonjour. Arrivederci.
So as for the ambience of this scene, first, I wanted us to hear wind. That's stormy wind in forest. Then I wanted us to hear birds on top of that. That's very quiet forest with birds. Then I wanted us to hear her bicycle on top of that. And finally, I wanted the traffic to continue on top of all of that. So the office scene uses a bunch of layers of WALLA. If you're not familiar with what WALLA is the sound of people talking. It's called that because in Hollywood, they would just record people saying WALLA, 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 WALLA over again so that there weren't any recognizable words in the background sounds. One funny thing I noticed in the Epidemic library is that they have a lot of voices in Swedish. And you may wonder, why would they use Swedish so much? Well, the reason is because Swedish sounds a lot like English, but you can't understand what they're saying if you're an English speaker. So if they have a crowd speaking Swedish, then it effectively works as WALLA without requiring people to just say the word WALLA, WALLA, WALLA. Swedish WALLA. Office WALLA with telephones. A different kind of telephone. More Swedish WALLA just to add density. And the hero sound here of keyboards. And then I struggled a bit to find a sound that identified surfing really distinctly because you can use a bunch of ocean, wave sounds, but it doesn't quite have that surfing feel if it's just waves. And then I found a dude saying woohoo, or whatever this is. And I added some reverb to it, cathedral preset reverb at about 50% to push him further back in the mix. Generally, the more reverb you add to a sound, the further back it seems to be in the sound mix. Boxing scene, I opened with the sound of the bell dinging. That's what tells you this is boxing. Then I just used various punch sound effects, and I added a transitional sound effect here. So what you're hearing there is ES fire whoosh. And I added some dead space to the end of the sound, and then I made a sub clip out of it, or a compound clip in Final Cut. That's what you're seeing here. That's Alt-Shift-G to do it, just in case you don't know how to do that, Alt-Shift-G. And then on that sub clip, I added reverb. That dead space I added in the sub clip allows me to extend the clip longer than it originally was, so I can let that reverb ring out a bit longer. Okay, so now we are into this scene where she dances. So I did those cheer sound effects in two different layers. We have a more ambient background bed. And then we have a foreground cluster of teen cheers. So the way that I made these cheers foreground and the other cheers background was just through reverb. So on the foreground element, I had it at only 31% reverb. And then for the background bed, it was 65%. And then when she takes off her earbuds there, I just applied some effects to make the cheering sound more tinny. So we've got a bunch of stuff on top of each other. Reverb, large hall 2, rumble reducer, vintage radios, and remove low frequencies. Those were all just kind of tweaked according to my tastes. I just messed around with them for a while. And then we just end with some ambience of a night cornfield. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed the short film. Hope you enjoyed the walkthrough of all those sound effects. If you want an even more in-depth version, I'm going to post it in my online film school, Unscripted Studio. That's a film school where I teach you how to make your own films from beginning to end with only the gear that fits in a backpack. It's based on my experiences as a travel filmmaker. So check the description of this video for the link to Unscripted Studio to learn more. So I hope this brightened your day just a little bit if you're stuck at home like I am. Hang in there, we're all in this together. I'll see you next time.